F-16s don't have stealth capabilities, Colonel Marcus Thunderbolt Anderson announced to the assembled fighter pilots at Nellis Air Force Base, smirking at Captain Taylor Reed, who had just claimed she could make any aircraft invisible to enemy radar. That's physics, not wishful thinking. The 12 male pilots laughed at what they considered an impossible boast, but none of them knew that in exactly 90 minutes, her supposedly non-stealth F-16 would destroy an entire enemy squadron without appearing on a single radar screen. Captain Taylor Reed was 31 years old, auburn hair pulled back in regulation style, green eyes that revealed nothing. She'd been flying F-16 at Nellis for 18 months, consistently overlooked for elite assignments despite perfect flight scores. What everyone failed to notice was that every weekend, she disappeared into the Nevada desert for training that no other pilot had ever experienced. "I'm saying put me up against your entire stealth squadron," Taylor stated simply. "Standard F-16 versus your F-22s. I'll destroy every aircraft without appearing on radar." Captain Derek Venom Morrison, squadron leader, burst into laughter. "You're serious? One F-16 against 4 stealth fighters? Dead serious. You're on, Reed. When you get shot down in 5 minutes, I want to hear you admit that real stealth beats whatever fantasy you're peddling." The bet was set. Tomorrow's red flag exercise would pit Taylor's single F-16 against Morrison's elite stealth squadron in combat that would either prove her technique or end her career. That evening, Taylor drove 45 minutes into desert that appeared on no official map. The hidden hangar contained her secret, an F-16 that looked completely standard but had been modified with techniques her father had developed during classified black projects. Not true stealth technology, but something more subtle. Radar absorption compounds and signature management systems that could make any aircraft effectively invisible when combined with proper technique. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Real stealth isn't about hiding, Taylor. It's about controlling exactly when and how you appear to your enemies." The next morning, Red Flag 25-3 commenced at 0800 hours. Taylor's mission was simple: defend a high-value target against Morrison's stealth attack. The odds were 4 F-22 Raptors against 1 F-16. Every pilot on base expected the exercise to last 15 minutes maximum. Taylor's F-16 lifted off and immediately began implementing tactics that existed nowhere in official manuals. She dropped to 500 feet above ground level, using terrain masking to vanish from long-range detection. The Nevada desert became her camouflage as she flew at 450 miles per hour between rock formations that hid her aircraft from enemy radar. Morrison's squadron approached at 30,000 feet, confident in their technological superiority. "Blue leader to blue squadron, begin attack run. Red force won't see us coming." But 40 miles away, Taylor was watching everything. Using signature cycling techniques her father had perfected, she manipulated her radar return to appear as atmospheric interference, bird formations, or equipment glitches. To Morrison's radar operators, she was invisible noise. At 0815 hours, she made her first move. Climbing rapidly to 35,000 feet, Taylor positioned herself above Morrison's formation while maintaining minimal radar signature. From this position, she could track their every movement while remaining undetected. Her father had taught her that information was more valuable than firepower. Know where your enemies are before they know where you are. "Blue 3, I'm getting weird radar returns," Captain Sandra Phoenix Lopez transmitted. "Multiple contacts, but they keep disappearing." "Probably just desert interference," Morrison replied. "Stay focused on the target." What they were detecting were carefully controlled moments when Taylor allowed her F-16 to become briefly visible, creating the illusion of multiple aircraft while masking her true position. She was psychological warfare made manifest. making her enemies see threats that weren't there while the real threat remained invisible. 20 minutes into the exercise, Taylor struck like lightning. She dove from altitude directly behind Morrison's formation, approaching at maximum speed from their radar shadow. At 8,000 feet separation, she fired simulated missiles at 2 targets simultaneously. "Blue leader is down! Blue 2 is down!" The exercise controller's voice crackled across all frequencies. Morrison's shock transmission filled the radio. Where the hell did she come from? I never saw her on scope. But Taylor was already gone, diving back to terrain level before the remaining fighters could respond. 2 down in 30 seconds, using attack vectors that should have been impossible against stealth aircraft. "Blue 3, Blue 4, maintain formation!" Morrison's voice from the ground carried obvious frustration. "She's got to be visible somewhere." Captain Lopez and Captain Ryan Bolt Stevens closed ranks, flying defensive patterns while frantically scanning their radar displays for any sign of the ghost fighter that was methodically destroying their squadron. Taylor appeared 15 miles east of their position, climbing rapidly and painting herself clearly on their radar for exactly 20 seconds before vanishing again. Both remaining F-22s turned to intercept, but when they reached the contact location, nothing was there. "She's playing with us," Stevens transmitted angrily, "making us chase shadows." "Stay calm," Lopez replied. "She has to attack eventually. When she does, we'll be ready." But Taylor was already positioning for the final phase of her demonstration. Using vertical maneuvers her father had taught her during countless hours of secret training, she climbed to 40,000 feet, far above normal F-16 operational ceiling, and began a dive that would bring her down on the remaining stealth fighters like a falling star. The attack came from directly above, an angle that required perfect timing and precise control. Taylor's F-16 screamed down through thin atmosphere, using gravity and engine power to achieve speeds that pushed her aircraft beyond normal limitations. "Contact high! Diving fast!" Lopez shouted. "Missile lock!" Firing. But Taylor's signature management made target acquisition impossible. Her F-16's radar return fluctuated wildly as she dove, making it impossible for the F-22's targeting computers to achieve stable lock. The simulated missiles missed by hundreds of meters. Taylor's response was devastating. At 12,000 feet separation, she fired her remaining missiles with targeting data she'd calculated manually using techniques that predated computer-assisted warfare. "Blue 3 is down! Blue 4 is down! Exercise terminated!" Silence filled the radio frequencies. Ground control spent 5 minutes confirming what their instruments were telling them. One F-16 had eliminated 4 F-22 Raptors in 28 minutes without sustaining damage or appearing on radar for more than 90 seconds total. When Taylor landed at Nellis, the entire base was waiting. Pilots, ground crews, maintenance personnel, and administrative staff lined the tarmac like spectators at an air show. Word of the impossible victory had spread throughout the facility faster than wildfire. Colonel Anderson walked across the concrete, his expression unreadable. Taylor shut down her engine and climbed out of the cockpit, expecting disciplinary action for disrupting the exercise with unauthorized tactics. Instead, Anderson stopped 3 feet away and slowly saluted. "Captain Reed, I owe you an apology. I also owe this base a complete re-evaluation of our combat training." His voice carried across the silent tarmac. "What you demonstrated today represents capabilities that could change the outcome of real warfare." Morrison approached with his defeated squadron trailing behind. "Reed, I need to learn everything you just taught us. Those techniques, where did they come from?" "My father developed them during classified operations. He believed that pilot creativity could overcome any technological advantage." "Your father was Shadow Reed," Anderson said quietly. I served with him briefly in the 90s. He was developing techniques that were considered too advanced for standard implementation. He paused. I should have made the connection sooner. Sir, my father taught me the capabilities matter more than credentials. I wanted to prove the techniques worked before revealing their source. Anderson nodded slowly. Captain Reed, you're being transferred to a classified program that focuses on advanced tactical development. Your mission will be teaching select pilots these signature management techniques. 6 weeks later, pilots trained in Taylor's methods would achieve combat victories using tactics that combine traditional flying skills with revolutionary approaches to radar warfare. Her techniques would be studied at classified facilities and implemented by special operations squadrons worldwide. But the story that spread throughout the Air Force was simpler. One pilot with an impossible claim had backed it up with a performance that redefined what everyone thought they knew about air combat. Morrison became Taylor's first student and eventually her closest ally in developing the new tactical program. I learned more about flying in one day than I had in my entire previous career, he would tell other pilots. She didn't just beat us, she taught us that we'd been thinking about stealth completely wrong. 3 months after the exercise, Taylor received a letter from the Pentagon. Advanced Tactical Programs wanted to classify and study her father's techniques for implementation across multiple fighter squadrons. The methods that had been dismissed as impossible were now being evaluated for integration into standard Air Force training. Taylor kept the letter, but declined the assignment. Instead, she requested to remain at Nellis as an instructor, teaching young pilots that technological advantages could always be overcome by human creativity and unconventional thinking. Have you ever witnessed someone prove that the impossible is just another word for not yet attempted? The hangar where Taylor had trained remained hidden in the Nevada desert, but her father's techniques spread throughout the Air Force like ripples in still water. Pilots began experimenting with signature management, radar deception, and vertical attack profiles that challenged everything they'd been taught about modern air combat. Captain Lopez, one of the pilots Taylor had defeated, became one of her most dedicated students. She showed us that stealth isn't about what your aircraft can do. It's about what you can make your enemies think your aircraft is doing. The red flag exercise was officially classified as a training success, but privately, Air Force leadership recognized it as something more, proof that human innovation could still surprise and defeat the most advanced military technology in the world. Taylor's techniques weren't magic, weren't secret technology, weren't science fiction. They were the result of one pilot who had been taught to think beyond the limitations that others accepted as permanent. Her father had spent years developing methods that used physics, psychology, and timing to achieve what expensive stealth technology accomplished through engineering. 6 months after the exercise, Taylor was promoted to major and given command of the Advanced Tactical Training Squadron. Her first class included Morrison and 8 other elite pilots who had volunteered to learn unconventional combat methods. Flying stealth isn't about hiding, she told them during their first lesson. It's about choosing exactly when to be seen and when to disappear. Your enemies can't hit what they can't predict. The training program Taylor developed became legendary within Air Force Special Operations. Pilots learned to use atmospheric conditions, terrain features, and enemy psychology to achieve tactical advantages that couldn't be bought or manufactured. They learned that the most sophisticated technology in the world was still vulnerable to human creativity and unconventional thinking. Morrison, now Taylor's second-in-command, often reflected on the day he'd learned his most important lesson about air combat. We thought superior technology made us invincible. Taylor taught us that superior thinking makes technology irrelevant. The transformation that followed Taylor's demonstration was immediate and profound. Within 48 hours, requests for tactical training were flooding in from Air Force bases across the country. Pilots who had spent their entire careers believing that technology determined combat outcomes suddenly wanted to learn techniques that made technology secondary to skill. Captain Thompson, a veteran F-22 pilot from Langley Air Force Base, arrived at Nellis 3 days after the exercise. "I've been flying stealth fighters for 8 years," he told Taylor during their first training session. "I thought I understood air combat. After hearing about what you did here, I realize I've been flying like a computer program instead of thinking like a warrior." Taylor's training program expanded rapidly. She developed a curriculum that taught pilots to use atmospheric conditions, enemy psychology, and unconventional maneuvers to achieve tactical advantages that couldn't be programmed into any computer system. The techniques were deceptively simple in concept, but required months of practice to master effectively. The first lesson, Taylor explained to her inaugural class of 16 elite pilots, is forgetting everything you think you know about radar. Radar sees what you show it. Your job is controlling that conversation. The training exercises that followed became legendary at Nellis. Pilots learned to use weather patterns to mask their approach, terrain features to create false radar returns, and timing to appear exactly when enemy defenses were looking elsewhere. They discovered that altitude changes could make their aircraft's signature fluctuate in ways that confused targeting computers. Most importantly, they learned that unpredictability was more valuable than any technological advantage. Lieutenant Sarah Falcon Chen was Taylor's most dedicated student. She'd been flying F-16s for 6 years without a single distinguished performance, consistently rated as adequate by her superiors. Under Taylor's instruction, she learned to make her aircraft signature dance across radar screens in patterns that drove enemy pilots to distraction. "I always thought good flying meant following procedures perfectly," Chen explained after mastering signature cycling techniques. "Taylor taught me that excellent flying means knowing when to break every rule simultaneously." Within 6 months, pilots trained in Taylor's methods were achieving exercise victories that shocked Air Force leadership. Standard F-16s were consistently defeating F-22s, F-35s, and other advanced fighters by using tactics that combined pilot creativity with physics principles that had been overlooked by conventional training. The Pentagon took notice. A classified review board studied footage from dozens of training exercises where Taylor's students had achieved seemingly impossible victories. The conclusion was unanimous. These techniques represented a fundamental shift in air combat philosophy that needed immediate implementation across all fighter squadrons. General Patricia Storm Williams arrived at Nellis for a personal demonstration. As a 3-star general with 30 years of flying experience, she'd seen every tactical innovation in modern military aviation. She was skeptical that any technique could overcome the technological advantages built into stealth aircraft. "Major Reed," she said, Taylor had been promoted after her training program success. "I need to see this myself. My F-22 against your F-16. If your techniques work, we'll integrate them into advanced pilot training nationwide." The demonstration flight took place on a Tuesday morning with clear skies and perfect visibility. General Williams flew the most advanced F-22 in the Air Force inventory, equipped with upgraded radar and targeting systems that represented billions of dollars in military research. Taylor's F-16 was deliberately chosen as the most basic model available. No upgrades, no special equipment, no technological advantages of any kind. The exercise parameters were simple. Air-to-air combat over designated Nevada airspace, winner determined by first simulated missile hit. General Williams launched first, climbing to 25,000 feet and engaging her stealth systems. On ground radar, her F-22 appeared as little more than a ghost echo, nearly invisible to conventional detection methods. Taylor launched 10 minutes later in her standard F-16, immediately disappearing into terrain masking that made her completely invisible to all tracking systems. For 15 minutes, General Williams searched empty desert sky. Her advanced radar detected nothing. Her targeting computer showed no threats. Her aircraft's sophisticated sensor suite reported clear airspace in all directions. The attack came from below and behind, an approach vector that Williams's experience told her was impossible. Taylor's F-16 had somehow climbed to attack position without appearing on any detection system, fired missiles from point-blank range, and vanished again before the F-22's defensive systems could even register the threat. Blue Leader is down. Exercise terminated. General Williams landed her F-22 in stunned silence. When she climbed out of the cockpit, Taylor was waiting with an explanation that would reshape Air Force tactical doctrine. General, stealth technology makes aircraft hard to see, but predictable flight patterns make pilots easy to anticipate. I use signature management to control when you could detect me, terrain masking to approach from unexpected vectors, and timing to attack during the brief moments when your radar was scanning other sectors. Williams studied Taylor with the intensity of someone seeing the future of air combat. Major Reed, you just defeated the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world using a plane that's older than some of our pilots. How is that possible? Because, sir, the most sophisticated stealth system ever developed is a human mind that refuses to be limited by conventional thinking. The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. General Williams wanted to understand every aspect of Taylor's techniques, every principle behind signature management, every method for achieving radar deception. By the end of their discussion, she'd made a decision that would impact military aviation for decades. Major Reed, you're being promoted to lieutenant colonel and assigned to establish the Advanced Tactical Innovation Center. Your mission is developing and teaching unconventional combat methods to select pilots from every Air Force base worldwide. The program Taylor created became the most classified training initiative in modern military history. Pilots learned techniques that made expensive stealth technology secondary to human creativity and tactical innovation. They discovered that physics could be used creatively rather than simply accepted as limitation. Morrison, now Taylor's deputy commander, often reflected on how profoundly one exercise had changed his understanding of air combat. We'd been flying like we were extensions of our aircraft's computer systems. Taylor taught us to fly like the aircraft was an extension of our imagination. The techniques spread beyond the Air Force. Navy pilots requested access to signature management training. Marine aviators wanted to learn terrain masking methods. Even civilian test pilots began studying Taylor's approaches to unconventional flight dynamics. But Taylor's greatest satisfaction came from watching her students discover their own creative potential. Every pilot has moments of brilliance, she told new classes. My job isn't teaching you specific techniques. It's teaching you to trust your ability to develop techniques that don't yet exist. Years later, when military historians studied the evolution of air combat tactics in the 21st century, they would point to one exercise at Nellis Air Force Base as the moment when pilot creativity reasserted its importance over technological reliance. They would write about signature management, radar deception, and vertical attack profiles that challenged fundamental assumptions about modern warfare. But pilots who were there that day remembered something simpler. One person who refused to accept that impossible was a permanent limitation, who proved that human innovation could still surprise and defeat the most advanced military systems in the world. Taylor Reed didn't revolutionize air combat by accident. She revolutionized it by carrying forward techniques that had been waiting for the right moment to prove their value. With one exercise that lasted 28 minutes, she demonstrated that the most effective stealth system ever developed was a human mind that refused to be constrained by conventional thinking. F-16s don't have stealth capabilities, Colonel Anderson had announced that morning. 8 hours later, he was asking Taylor to teach every pilot on his base how she'd made physics irrelevant through pure technique. Because sometimes the most important breakthroughs come from people who prove that limitations exist only until someone demonstrates they don't.